After 9 years of fighting in court, Google just lost the biggest legal battle of its life, and it's going to cost them nearly $4.7 billion. That's the final bill from an antitrust case that the European Union brought against the company back in 2015. Google appealed again, and appealed once more, but the courts have now ruled decisively against them. Here's why this matters to you. This isn't just about a big fine. It's about how companies are allowed to use their control over entire ecosystems, billions of phones, tablets, and devices worldwide. The case centered on how Google bundles its services onto Android phones, essentially forcing manufacturers to include Google's apps and give them premium placement. It sounds technical, but it's really a story about who controls your phone and what apps you see first. For years, Google argued they weren't doing anything wrong. Other companies could build Android without their services. But the European Union court said no. They ruled that Google abused its dominant market position to crush rivals and force users into Google's ecosystem. This verdict doesn't just end the case, it opens the door to more tech regulation across the world. And that's where this story gets genuinely interesting. To understand why this fine is so massive, you need to go back 11 years. In 2015, the European Commission, basically the European Union's executive branch, started investigating Google's practices. They'd noticed something troubling. Google owned Android, the operating system running nearly 80% of the world's smartphones. And Google was using that power in ways that seemed unfair to competitors. Here's how it worked. When phone manufacturers wanted to use Android, Google would require them to pre-install Google Search, Google Chrome, Google Maps, and YouTube. Not optional, mandatory. Manufacturers couldn't negotiate. They couldn't say, we'd like to make our own search app or use Bing instead. Google controlled the entire ecosystem. It was like owning the pipes and forcing everyone to buy only your water, your electricity, and your internet through the same pipes. The Commission investigated for years and finally, in 2018, ruled that Google had indeed abused its position. They slapped a $2.4 billion fine on the company, at the time, the largest fine ever given to a tech company in history. But Google didn't accept that verdict. They appealed. They kept appealing. And yesterday, after 8 more years of legal battles, the European Court of Justice ruled that the Commission was right all along. Google lost. And this time, there's nowhere left to appeal. So what exactly was the violation? It comes down to something called tying, and it's a concept that regulators have worried about for decades. Tying happens when you're so dominant in one market that you force people to buy your products in other markets too. Think of it this way. Imagine a company controlled 90% of all vehicles sold worldwide, and they said, if you buy our car, you must use our gasoline, our insurance, our repair shops, and our car rental service. That's tying. Google did the same thing with Android. They had such dominance in mobile operating systems that they could force manufacturers to bundle all their services, Search, Maps, Chrome, YouTube, as a package deal. This mattered because Google's competitors in Search, Maps, and browsers couldn't compete fairly. A user might never even try alternatives because Google's apps came pre-installed, prominently placed, and deeply integrated. Microsoft Edge had to fight for visibility. Firefox struggled to gain ground. DuckDuckGo couldn't establish itself. The European Union argued, and the court agreed, that this wasn't competition. It was abuse of market position. Google had so much power that they didn't have to innovate or compete on quality. They could just use their Android dominance to force their other products onto users. And that's not how free markets are supposed to work. That's where the rules come in. Let's talk about what this actually means in real terms. If you own an Android phone right now, you've been living inside Google's ecosystem whether you chose to or not. Every phone comes with Google Search as the default search engine. Every phone has Google Maps. Chrome is pre-installed. YouTube is there. Google Play is your app store. Now, were these good apps? Sure, many of them are excellent, but the problem isn't quality, it's choice. You might prefer Firefox to Chrome. You might want to use DuckDuckGo for privacy reasons. You might like Microsoft's Bing or other search engines, but on most Android phones, you'd have to actively work to switch. The default settings keep pushing you toward Google. That's what the court found problematic. Another example, when phone makers wanted to use Android, they couldn't negotiate. Samsung, Motorola, OnePlus, none of them could say, "We want to make our own Maps app," or "We want to make Bing the default search." Google said, "Take it or leave it." This absolute control meant competitors couldn't build sustainable businesses. Why would developers invest in a competing Maps app if 90% of phones already had Google Maps pre-installed and locked in? That's anti-competitive behavior. The fine exists because Europe decided that dominance doesn't give you the right to abuse it. This isn't the first time regulators have fined Google for antitrust violations. It's not even the second. This is actually the third major antitrust case against Google in Europe alone. In 2017, Google paid $900 million for favoring its own shopping service in search results. In 2019, they paid $1,700 million for restricting how other companies could advertise online. Now, they're paying $4.7 billion more. Add it up and Google's spent over $7 billion in antitrust fines just in Europe. But here's where it gets wild. These fines barely hurt Google. The company makes over $200 billion in revenue every year. $4.7 billion is annoying, but it's not devastating. It's like a person making $200,000 getting fined $4,700. Serious? Sure, but not life-changing. This is why some critics say the fines aren't working. Regulators fine the company, Google pays, and nothing actually changes. Users still get the same pre-installed apps. Competitors still struggle. The real power would be forcing Google to change its behavior, to let manufacturers choose which apps come pre-installed or which search engine is default. That would actually matter. But for now, all we have is another massive fine. And Google. They'll probably just add it to the cost of doing business. Here's what this ruling actually means for the future of technology. First, it's a clear signal to every company with a dominant platform that the European Union will not tolerate abuse of that position. Amazon owns the e-commerce platform. Apple owns iOS and the App Store. Meta owns the social media ecosystem. All of them should be paying attention because what happened to Google today could happen to them tomorrow. Second, this emboldens regulators worldwide. The European Union isn't the only region watching. The United Kingdom has launched similar investigations. The United States is investigating Google's practices under antitrust law. Even countries like India and South Korea are looking at big tech. If Europe can successfully challenge Google's Android practices, other regulators will follow. They'll use the same arguments in their own courts. Third, this affects how tech companies will operate going forward. Some experts predict that Google might have to fundamentally restructure how Android works. They might have to let manufacturers choose which default apps come pre-installed. They might have to open up Android in ways that actually let competition flourish. Could other big tech companies face similar requirements? Absolutely. This case isn't just about Google. It's about setting a precedent that dominance comes with responsibilities. And if that precedent holds, it changes the entire landscape of how tech platforms operate. The implications go way beyond one fine. So what should you actually understand from all this? First, monopoly law exists for a reason. When one company controls too much, it stifles innovation and choice. The whole point of free markets is that better companies win through competition. But if one company uses dominance in one area to crush competition in another area, the market can't work properly. That's anti-competitive behavior, and regulators exist to stop it. Second, if you're a developer or a startup, this matters to you directly. Before this ruling, if you built a competing Maps app or search engine, you were fighting an uphill battle. Android phones all came with Google Maps pre-installed. Developers couldn't get visibility. After this ruling, Google might be forced to change that, which actually creates opportunity for competitors. Third, if you use Android phones, you might soon get more choices. Manufacturers might be allowed to decide which default apps they include. You might be able to choose your search engine at setup rather than accepting Google's. That's the potential upside of this ruling. Finally, understand that this case took 11 years from investigation to final ruling. The legal process is slow, but it's also powerful. When regulators decide to act against tech giants, they can actually win. And the consequences are real. Here's what this ruling means for you and the future of technology. After 11 years and multiple appeals, Google lost. The European Court ruled that bundling Android services the way Google did was anti-competitive. And now the company has to face the consequences. $4.7 billion is the fine, but the real consequence is reputational. Google just lost its biggest appeal. The courts said Google abused its power, and that opens the door to more regulation, more scrutiny, and more pressure on big tech companies to change how they operate. This matters because these platforms touch billions of lives. The apps on your phone, the search engine you use, the services you trust, they are all products of market dynamics. But if those markets aren't actually competitive, if dominance lets companies crush rivals, then you're not really choosing. You're just getting whatever the dominant company decides to give you. The European Union just said that's not acceptable. They said competition matters, choice matters, and companies with power have a responsibility to compete fairly, not abuse their position. What this means going forward is uncertain. Google might restructure Android. Other tech giants might face similar pressure. The rules around platform dominance might get stricter worldwide. But one thing's clear, the era of unlimited big tech power just got a little smaller. And that's what's reshaping the technology industry right now.